So, speaking of which, here it is. So we got to understand the job, the schedule, what goes along with that, lack of sleep. I can't remember. It's going to be online, but when we talk about sleep and nutrition, there's an issue with some hormones, ghrelin and leptin, and we're going to talk about those a little bit, and how that creates a situation where the obesity, I guess, within the fire service, it becomes obvious that that's one of the main reasons that it's happening, is that sleep deprivation is causing that. So we'll go over that, and then we got to understand the basic nutrition concepts, so that's important to go over first. And then the individuals, and if they have any disorders we need to send to a specialist. Start with the basics, and this is something we should discuss as a group. There's a lot of trends out there, a lot of fad diets. We've talked about a few today, and we need to come up with a stance. We're going to talk about this at the end. Based on evidence, we got to have something that we all agree upon as far as how we approach that, and we'll discuss some reasons that maybe we want to be a little more conservative with that and stick to the slow and steady. And then 5, we can create recommendations, and I'll give you a strategy here at the end that you can tell me what you think, and we can adjust if we need to. So hormones and sleep deprivation, they get thrown out of whack, and cortisol creates issues. There's a whole slew of issues that is created by the chronic cortisol levels. Cortisol is obviously good when we need it, when we need that fight or flight, but it's catabolic, it breaks down. So lack of sleep, there's lack of that anabolic hormone release that's going to help build up and synthesize the building blocks of muscles. And then, like I said, ghrelin is the hormone that increases appetite, and leptin is the one that decreases appetite. And when we don't sleep, those are all skewed. And the way I think about it is a computer. You know, if you run it too hard with too many things open, it's not going to run correctly. But if you reset it, hit sleep, whatever, it's going to come back and run a lot better. So what happens when we sleep has a lot to do with consolidation of memories. You know, our body is trying to figure out how to adapt to that day. And if we don't get that appropriate sleep, it doesn't happen. So it just goes a little bit nutty, and it creates issues, not just physiological, but psychological. So insulin resistance is something we talked about as well, that is caused by lack of sleep. Is that, how does that cause it? Is it the cortisol related issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think high cortisol levels have a cascade effect because of the basically impact that they have on inflammation and just our body's ability to respond to physiological markers. So it has a direct effect on the pancreas and its ability to release insulin. And then that also can therefore impact our body's ability to take up blood glucose, which in the end leads to high blood sugar and even more inflammation. So it's like a cascade.
Would you mind, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around the metabolic disorder that I guess we're prone to, how that is that kind of the start of it? Is that, and then it
looks different for different people. So you can either have insulin resistance, which basically means that your body's producing enough insulin. Insulin's just not causing the basically the sugar to be taken up by the cell. And you can have issues where your pancreas just isn't producing enough insulin. So they both lead to increased blood sugar, which is, has a range of but the mechanism is different. Most type 2 diabetes, so late onset diabetes, is insulin resistance, but they're starting to show now that also you can get issues with just the production of insulin.
All right, I'm sure we could spend hours on that subject as well, but let's move on and not drag it out like I did yesterday. Let's talk about allostasis again. You guys remember what allostasis is?
Nope.
Cade Martin.
I'm totally forgot.
You seriously did? Mm-hmm. Dude, I said it like 20 times yesterday.
Is that homeostasis? It's different? What's the slide after homeostasis? But everything. Full frontal stasis?
Yes. That's a good analogy. No, it's not actually. Anybody? Seriously? Somebody can give me. Allostasis. So homeostasis.
Mental and
yes. Someone got it.
Okay.
You did not.
I said that. Full frontal.
Did you?
I really don't.
Homeostasis is physiological balance. Allostasis is taking the physiological balance as well as the psychological, into account.
You like to do a pendulum kind of moving back and forth.
Let's get that. That's great. So we swing one way, and then allostasis is trying to bring us back down to normal. So that takes us to this point about extreme diets. So we're trying to maintain allostasis all the time, right? So we talked about allostatic load yesterday, and the higher that load that we place upon ourselves, the more recovery is going to be required on that backswing. So we need to take that into account. So as far as extreme diets go, if we're trying to run calls and those calls are stressful and we're glycogen depleted, then the stress of that call is going to go through the roof, and it's going to open us up to injury. If we're glycogen depleted and we respond to a call and something goes wrong, that's when a lot of the psychological trauma comes, and it's because we weren't on our A game, because our bodies have evolved over millions of years to need certain things, and with this job, we really need to remember that it matters. It matters what we eat, when we eat, and we need to think about it more in terms of performance, physical and psychological, and cognitive performance, and our state of readiness. So that's something we're going to talk about a little bit later too, is measuring our state of readiness, or looking at ourselves in relation to that and the different areas of readiness. And we'll go into that a little bit later. So I guess the question is, how do we approach it when people would like to do a certain diet, a ketogenic diet, or a intermittent fasting? Is there any other? What are the main? Are those the two main ones right now?
Paleo, keto.
Well, paleo.
Keto, yeah.
Yeah, keto, I thought I said keto. Paleo is not really getting you glycogen depleted if you're balancing it out, right? Am I wrong on that one?
Yeah. So just in terms of percentage, if we wanted to look like percentage macro breakdown, to be ketogenic, you're looking at like 70 to 80% of your macros, your calories are coming from fat. 20% are coming from protein. So most people think that they can eat more protein than they can on a ketogenic diet, but your protein, the amino acids in protein can actually be turned into glucose. So if you take in too much protein, you're just going to make, your body wants to use glucose, so it's going to use those amino acids. And then you're looking at like really low levels, so like 10% or less. 10% is the high end from carbohydrates. Paleo, there's not necessarily a divided macro level. I would say protein's higher than everyday nutrition. So you're getting kind of more, I think average is like the, 30, 40, 40. So you're getting 30% from fat, 40% from protein, and 40% from 100. 30-30-40, and 40% from protein. So it's going to be a little bit more protein, definitely more fat, and probably a little low on the carbohydrates. It's just where you get those foods. I think paleo is really more about sourcing, you know, than how much.
Perfect. One of the main reasons that we overtrain is because we apply too much stress with not enough recovery. And nutrition is one of the main parts of recovery. So let's talk about allostasis and just in relation to running calls. So if we're running calls, we get, you know, let's say a full rest early in the morning, and then a man down or whatever, and then a stroke, and then we get a pretty big spike because it looks like it's a legit fire, but it's really not, and then we come right back down. And then, so we're intermittent fasting, see this trend's kind of going up, and then we can get, you know, something that's basic, but because we're intermittent fasting and we're glycogen depleted, our perception of that issue, or I mean that, I guess that stressor, you know, go up through, and then when we come back down, it's going to be just kind of taking us up. So as we go through a 48-hour shift, the trend is up, and the idea is with the 96 is to bring that back down as quickly as possible. And I think nutrition is going to be key to that, and to prevent overtraining and burnout. They're all so closely related. That's why we're adding all these portions in to the holistic approach. So gradual, slow and steady, 1 to 2 pounds of weight loss a week is the way to go. And in regard to extreme diets, you guys tell me what you think, but a decent approach, I would say, if we're asked whether we approve or, you know, what we think about a certain diet, is that to get the basics of nutrition down nice and solid, and if they want to vary from that after that, it's up to them. We were up on a pretty significant fire that was threatening structures up on the foothills in North Ogden, and it was, you know, I don't know, 20 yards maybe away from the houses. It was moving, and somehow I got teamed up with a deputy chief. And so I was coming back after we had a line out up in the field, and I was coming back, and I looked at the chief, and he was standing by the door like this. I was like, "Hey, Chief, are you okay?" And he didn't give me any response. It's like this. So I put him inside the brush truck, and I realized that he was just like out. So I go into resuscitation mode. I pull him on the ground and go to fill a carotid. I couldn't fill a carotid. It freaked me out, man. So I go to fill a femoral, and didn't fill one there either. So then we called for life flight. We had Ogden coming. Ogden, 20 minutes away, got there in 5 minutes. It got pretty crazy. So the moral of this story is the bad diet of choice, I guess 6 years ago, right, was that one. Basically, with 500 calories or something a day. 500 a day. It's called the HCG diet. 500 calories a day.
Basically, kills your appetite, yeah, and then you go on a low-calorie diet.
You had something, didn't you?
I experimented with this intermittent fasting, and I would never do this in a combat. If I was working a combat schedule, I think it's dangerous itself. When you're driving the desk, it's okay. But yeah, when you're fasting, there's no energy in the day. The day afterwards, you're low energy. I wouldn't be able to respond to a fire very well.
Yeah,
I wouldn't recommend it.
Thank you. Yeah. So if somebody wants to do it, we give them a recommendation while they're on duty to, I don't know, what would you say, have bananas in a protein shake or something?
What, in terms of coming off of it?
No, if you got a call and you're heading to a fire, and you got to be putting on your gear and thinking about the fire, so that brings another issue into it. It takes away situational awareness. That just kind of demonstrates that allostatic load and capacity that's reduced with that excess stress, right? So anyway, that being said, what would be a good recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, definitely bananas are rice or potatoes. I'm just thinking of things that are absorbed really quickly. Protein shake is great. I mean, protein is going to help with the recovery, but in terms of getting energy quickly, it's going to be all carbohydrates.
So maybe a gel.
Yeah, with lots of water. If you have an all-in-one protein shake that's not just protein, so you're mixing it with some fruit juice or some kind of milk or something, and you're getting sugars from that, then yeah, it's great. But definitely your focus should be carbohydrates. You want to have energy to respond quickly.
Cool. We should put like snacks in every rig. What were you gonna say?
So you kept it the 24-hour fast. I did the 16/8. So from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. was my eating window, and then I wouldn't eat until 11 a.m. the next day. And I'm not doing it anymore because I'm going back to combat, and the more I've learned about it, I guess it's overall increases cortisol levels, and long term it's pretty bad for you. So I'm not doing it anymore. But in mine, with that setup, I didn't have any, at least short-term negative repercussions that I felt, even during like high-intensity workouts. But I felt great.
I think for that too, it depends on when you're working out. So I've done it too.
I was doing it
I've done
during
16 days. Were you?
Mm-hmm. I'd work out in the morning, and I mean I was tired, but it was high-intensity workouts, and I don't think it was significantly worse
than you would have done if you had been glycogen loaded before the workout.
I think, well, now I'm going to have to try and find
out.
My third time's going to get a lot better.
Another thing that's really important with all of this is that you bring up a really good point. Everybody is so variable. Everybody metabolizes glycogen differently or glucose differently, and everybody burns calories differently. So we can't just take one experience and then use that as a way to approach the broad spectrum. So this is what we're trying to square away right now, is what can we come together and decide on as far as a standard way to approach nutrition in the fire service.
Yeah, I mean, all of us have that friend that's never really had to worry about weight, right? So they've definitely shown that there are people that are genetically predisposed to not necessarily solely burn fat, but have genes that make it so that fat is kind of more of their preferred fuel makeup. I mean, they are able to select those genes in mice, So there are those genes out there. So there's definitely like a whole range of between your body and those fuels. So just kind of an expansion.
Perfect.
On that.
Thank you. All right. Dehydration. Let's talk a little bit about this in more detail. And after listening to Shannon talk about it a few times and looking at a few studies that we're going to review now, this is really important. It might be one of the most important things we can do to avoid acute injury as far as cardiac health goes, and I'll explain why. So there's been a lot of information put out recently. 2008, I've talked with a few people about this already, but there's been $150 million of federal money allocated to the Human Microbiome Project, which basically has found that these bacteria in our gut do a lot more than we ever thought they did. We're going to get more into that here in a minute, but in regard to heat and cardiac disorders, gut health and that healthy microbiome, that's what we're trying to keep healthy when we eat yogurt and fermented foods, play a huge role in controlling that filtering process. So some of these studies that I've been looking into and tying them together is how I've kind of developed my thought process on this. This is another reason I wanted Shannon to come help, is just help guide us through this. So cardiac events, we talked about that yesterday. AHA came out and said heat was causing it, not just risk factors for cardiac disease, but heat alone. Because of that extreme situation, our bodies can't cool down, so it's pulling fluid from every area that it can, right? Even the gut. And it's pulling so quickly, it doesn't really care as much what's coming with that fluid. And so what's coming with that fluid is literally the shit inside of our guts. And so that's creating a coagulation cascade, immune response, and the cytokine activation, which is the inflammation in the brain and throughout the body. So the body is just trying to maintain allostasis in a very, very extreme environment, and it's causing other damage. So that's why I wanted to bring up these two. The study managing heat and immune stress in athletes with evidence-based strategies. So that's based on a few different studies. International Association of Physical Performance or something. I got to remember. I'll come back to that towards the end of the day and tell you the exact group that did this study. And then the PTSD being to leaky gut is associated with those cytokines that they know now that can get through the blood-brain barrier, and they're associated with this psychiatric disorders, depression, PTSD. So a lot happens with all of that interaction, right? And we kind of just talked a little bit about it, but in the gut, a lot of that serotonin is stored and released and spread throughout, and the immune system obviously is that's the front line, if you want to think about it that way, to protecting us from the environment. And heat actually breaks down some of those protections. And we're going to talk about some strategies to build that up and hopefully prevent leaky gut as much as possible. So hydration is really important. This is a guideline in the book. Like I said, we are trying to develop our thoughts, right? And these are some basic thoughts that I've kind of spent some time putting together based on studies that are listed behind those guidelines and subject matter experts. So we already talked a lot about these. One thing I wanted to go over was caffeine in large amounts will act as a diuretic because I think we all use caffeine quite a bit, right? Do you guys measure how much caffeine you use a day? Yeah. Keep track? Let's see who wins. Jake, do you win? How many do you drink a day? 2 of those?
No. Well, probably 3 cups of coffee a day on average.
Got you beat. But you used to kill the rock stars, right? There's one right there right now. And that's not the weak rock star. That one's got like 200, 240.
Everybody goes.
Yeah.
About 500.
500. So actually that's within recommended range. Yeah. So, yeah, keep it up. And that's actually one of the recommendations. It's kind of funny. So we talked about fatigue management yesterday, and the National Association of EMS Offices is a group that came out with fatigue management strategies, and they had like 5, and every one of them said with the recommendation that was based on evidence that the evidence was low, very low, so there was no real great backing. So it's cool that we have a sleep doc on board with helping us out. But anyway, one of the recommendations was use caffeine. So yeah, I think it's good. Yeah, use it. But if you're using it to the point, I'm trying to remember, is it 3 milligrams per kilogram?
I don't know.
Okay, we'll have to. I'll double check that one too. Is somebody writing these things down? I need to double check. Being filmed. I'll double check. I think it's that. You're going to start shooting all that water out, and it's not just a diuretic. It also, I don't know how, but I was reading a few things. I guess it increases the urgency of urination as well, which isn't great if you're in your turnouts and trying to do work. You just let it run down your leg at that point. All right. Blue's got some stories about that. All right, so moving along. So I got some pre-hydration prior to exercise or prior to operations, we've got to think about hydration a day in advance, because we can't just slam a bunch of water right before we go to work out. We can't get 3.5 liters in, and we'll be hyponatremic at that point. So it's got to be throughout the day. But at least 16 ounces of water before operations or exercise. So during, you want to maintain, and this is what I think I was pointing to yesterday. I said some crazy number that wasn't even close enough. So hopefully someone fact check. But 2% of body mass within 30 minutes. It's pretty significant, I think. And like Shannon was saying, it varies quite a bit. And when we replace that water, we need to make sure if it's longer than 60 minutes, we're including electrolytes and carbohydrates with that. And here you can read those recommendations. And then we got after fire ground, you can weigh yourself. This is where the sweat test, I think, becomes really important. And I just added this after I listened to Shannon go through it again. And I don't even know if I spelled things right, but basically I think we should come up with something that we present to the administration as far as what we'd like to do yearly to specify individually what our requirements are, so that we, number one, know the importance of hydration, but also that it varies greatly from person to person. So, and then knowing our numbers with turnouts on and then with turnouts off. You think every 6 months be good to do, or would it be better to do more frequent?
Well, I'm going to turn that around with a question to you. Like, it could change every 6 months with training and how fit you are, but I think a huge impact is just environmental temperature.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, what you're doing in your gear and whether or not at that 6 month interval you see kind of a fluctuation in kind of the temperatures you're experiencing, either because you're training to, increase fitness or because you're performing, on the job duties. That would be the question, because the environmental factors in terms of temperature and humidity can have a huge impact. So if you think it would change for those reasons, I would make the interval based around changes.
Maybe winter, summer.
What if you could keep the interval or the conditions relatively consistent in terms of heat and, construction of turnouts, things of that nature? I'm just thinking of like, you get, this group in here as an example, so we want to go do a sweat study. You go get into a specified temperature sauna, working out on a bike for a prescribed amount of time, and then somehow do the sweat test. You know what I mean?
So just basing it off one thing, not in gear and without gear?
In gear, without gear, just try to minimize the variables in terms of...
Well, so my issue is that your results in gear and without gear is going to be different, and the difference in those results are going to inform you about, in those different scenarios, what you should be taking in. So there's a benefit in limiting variables, so you get, figure out what your kind of maintenance is. There's also a benefit in determining why you might sweat more, and then therefore how your needs are increased when you're in gear in a fire versus doing, row intervals in the gym.
So it wouldn't be exact, but it would give us an idea. And I'm a person that I don't sweat a ton.
I sweat a ton.
And there are other people that, get drenched, so it's good to know.
We also need to encourage, because we have different teams on the job, so we have to have a home, we have to have that. Not doing work, well, there's 20-minute operational periods, 1.5 liters water.
Really?
So you can equate that to put water in a dry suit, probably a liter or so, depending on what they're doing. So whenever we go to those companies, hazmat, especially houses, consider their hydration.
That's a really good point. I think that also opens up doors for us to, within those groups, if we are within those groups, to figure out how we can help one another out. And I mentioned yesterday the ice plate, the core, I think it's called Core Performance, and Eli actually.
We talked to them a little bit about.
Yeah, and I got a plate from them, and we've used it here, and that's a strategy that we could use to reduce the that exothermic reaction that's caused by the lack of ability to cool, right? Because you have that plate on your back, or both front and back, and you can wear that easily under that, and that would reduce that need for rehydration, so and reduce the risk. So that's something we should look at for hazmat, I think. Were you going to say something? Got interrupted. Interrupt you. So improve gut health. So there's probiotics, prebiotics. Is there one more?
Synbiotics are a combination of probiotics and prebiotics.
Okay.
It's just another word, marketing. You could say marketing word.
Would you describe the difference between the two?
Sure. So prebiotics, you think of as what the bacteria in your gut eat, just like fibers that are typically indigestible to humans. Like, we don't really possess the enzymes to break down most plant fibers, and so we rely on bacteria in our gut to break them down, and in the process get a lot of other nutrients from that. Probiotics are just bacteria. So whether it's in yogurt or you're taking it in a probiotic supplement or you like eating kimchi, they have different probiotics, but there's been a lot of research showing that with better studies, so things like lactobacillus, like acidophilus, I'm sure you've heard L-acidophilus, and bifidobacterium. Those are the ones that have been well studied and that they can help with gut health. And so that's what's in yogurt or taking it in a capsule form.
How much is in just a standard Greek yogurt?
Not a ton.
Okay, not even close to what we need, which is like 5 million
what we
colonies.
Need, what we need. We don't, I built that recommendation off of just what they use in studies and what's efficacious. It's hard to know what an individual person actually needs. I think people that are having gut problems, can be beneficial to take larger doses. So probiotics are measured in what's called colony-forming units, which is basically just a way they plate out bacteria. So a kind of a moderate dose of probiotics is about 5 billion CFUs, which is the colony-forming units. People that have gut issues or irritable bowel syndrome are going to benefit from much greater dosages. And the products out there, they now have up to like 100 billion, CFUs. So I don't really foresee it being a negative thing, but taking a moderate dose and trying to integrate fermented foods into your diet is always a good idea. Prebiotics are in vegetables, so once again, eat your vegetables. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to ask you to help me out with glutamine as well. I know that it helps the gut, but how does it help the gut?
So it just kind of fortifies the gut lining. So it helps with permeability of the gut. And if you're constantly stressed or from athletics or training or, what you guys see on a regular basis, especially heat, and leaky gut syndrome is an issue, and you're low in glutamine, that can cause problems. So supplementing with glutamine, which is an amino acid and in proteins, can be beneficial.
Perfect. We're going to get into those supplements. So, scope of practice. This has not been, and this is something obviously should promote throughout. We're not trying to give any type of advice that is above and beyond what you should take to your doctor. Right? If you're having legitimate pathological issues going on, you need to go to the doctor, and that should be our stance. But these supplements are ones that have been studied, like Shannon said, pretty thoroughly for the most part. I'm going to mention a couple newer ones that might be really beneficial to our situation. But for the most part, these have been studied. What I wanted to add to creatine was that the sleep deprivation benefit. I don't know. Am I there? Yeah, I'm there. following 24 hours of sleep deprivation had a positive effect on mood state and stress reduction, which is huge. We need as much help with that as we can get. And then there's protein as well. I think just having the adequate nutrition in our diet is not just going to help our bodies, but also our psyche. And this is a pretty interesting study that was done on creatine and traumatic brain injuries, and I just wanted to add it to show you what's going on out there. There's no recommendation right now, as far as I know, for traumatic brain injuries, but this journal that was published in is Nutrition and Traumatic Brain Injury. So it's this recommendation that they outlined was based on evidence that is out there on the fact that creatine helps with that cognitive function. A lot of us suffer a little bit from TBIs, so good to know. BCAs, what I want to talk about with this one is that novice athletes seem to have a greater effect, or is that that's something I found on that website we were discussing?
Yeah, I mean, I would throw out there that novice athletes, elderly, like the studies that have shown this huge impact of BCAAs, these are all populations that probably aren't optimally consuming protein. So, yeah.
That makes sense.
But
okay.
I trust it. I sell BCAAs. They're the greatest selling product. I think they're wonderful. I use them myself. But we also always get this pushback from people that are like, oh, you don't need them. Well, you don't need them if you're consuming protein way,
Yeah.
optimal, which is hard for some people to do. And it's hard to do right before you're going to work out, which is when BCAAs comes in.
Exactly. It's hard to do in our population, like we were saying. We intermittent fast just because it's part of the job. And sometimes it's a long period of time, other times it's not.
Yeah. It's theoretical, but I also wanted to mention this when you were talking about fatigue. So there's an idea called the central fatigue theorem that BCAAs actually compete with the uptake of another amino acid called tryptophan by the brain. And when tryptophan is taken to your brain, it basically gets turned into relaxation, like serotonin, things that make your brain tired. And so by taking in BCAAs or protein that contains BCAAs, you're limiting the absorption of tryptophan by the brain and therefore decreasing central fatigue and increasing endurance. So it's a theory. It's a hard thing to really test, but there's some good reasoning behind it. So that could be another benefit of taking BCAAs.
How often can you take them? I mean, I drink them all the time. I think
a lot of people do, and I haven't read anything about like toxicity. We did talk a little bit about, there have been some studies looking, although I haven't seen any conclusive results or anything that makes me nervous, that I'm trying to connect them with things like ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, because you see, right, these populations that are predisposed to brain issues or diseases like that, taking a lot of BCAAs, but then a lot of those populations also have a lot of traumatic head injury. So it becomes like, is it the BCAAs or is it the injury? And so they've done studies trying to see if there is any connection between BCAA supplementation and those things, and there have been no connections made. But people have looked into whether taking excessive amounts might, lead to something like that. And it doesn't seem like they do, but.
Okay. About peptide bonded amino acids that are marketed as peptide bonded?
It's basically like taking a protein and chopping it up into smaller pieces that aren't individual amino acids. So
it's a fake amino acid.
It's not a fake amino acid. It's just like a shorter piece of amino acid sequence. It's like aminos bonded together, which is fine. Your body has to break them down into free aminos to.
Okay, so it's not like it's going to build it up quicker because it still has to break it down and then build.
It still has to break it down.
Okay,
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right.
There are proteins that are, oh gosh, what's that? I should know this. there are types of protein that are like pre-digested protein. So not relative to free aminos, but relative to full-form proteins, absorption is going to be quicker. I forget what that class of protein is called. But.
Gotcha. All right, we talked about these already, but they're already they're studied pretty well as far as deficiencies within developed countries, and vitamin D probably because we're always inside, right? And then Shannon said that they're pretty closely related in how they absorb, so it makes sense that we're deficient in both. I wonder, is it when we're outside more, does it, I guess, stimulate a craving for magnesium-containing foods? Is that why we?
I've never heard that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious. So vitamin D, as far as overall health, it's going to increase testosterone levels, not like dramatically test, but it's going to help with the production of that. And with sleep deprivation, so don't go counting a bottle of that. But with sleep deprivation, that's an issue. Testosterone, low testosterone is associated with sleep deprivation. So it's going to help with that issue. And then magnesium was kind of what I was referring to earlier when we were talking about how do you prepare or how do you plan your recovery for a CNS activating strength session where you're hitting that ATP creatine phosphate system. And probably creatine is the best supplement to prep for something like that, is what it sounds like. And found a study that said magnesium threonate has potential cognitive enhancements. Kind of neat. Probiotics, getting a little more in depth with that one. So the microbiome project found that bacteria is involved in several biological processes like digestion, regulation of the immune system, production of vitamins, including pretty important ones, B vitamins, B12, thiamine, riboflavin, vitamin K, which is needed for blood coagulation, and they were tied to autoimmune disorders, which is really interesting. The science, I think, is still really new. There's products out there that are claiming to do amazing things based on the strain of probiotics, but it's hype, and it's part of that white noise that's out there, I think, right? Because everybody's trying to make a quick buck, and I think that they've done enough research to legitimize what they're doing with their biased point of view, right? And that's where issues come into play.
Yeah, I will say this just because I think a lot of times the bacteria in your gut seems like this far-removed kind of hippie science. But they did the study where they took mice and they had fat mice and thin mice that just naturally were fat and thin. And they took samples of the thin mice microbiome, basically their feces, and gave them to the fat mice and did the reverse. And the fat mice got thinner and the thin mice got fatter. Yeah, yeah. So
well, there are fecal transplants, and that's
can help with
different.
A lot of.
It's different, but
yeah, it can help with a lot of serious gut issues, things like Crohn's disease and yeah, just serious things that impact people's lives. They've had a lot of success with things like fecal transplants. But just in terms of, I mean, and these weren't really diseased mice. They were just mice that were overweight and mice that were naturally thinner and had differences. I mean, they're on the same diet. So it's not even a diet-induced difference in microbiome. So just, I'm saying that not because I'm saying that, you know, take a probiotic and you will lose weight. It's much more complicated than that. But it can have such a huge impact on so many different health issues. And I think it often gets kind of put in this camp of like voodoo magic. But
It's starting to be
it's
legitimized.
starting to be legitimized as they do more and more research, and because there's this huge link between the gut-brain axis. I mean, you get hungry, and that's something that happens in your brain, right? But it's not your brain telling you it's hungry, it's the message coming from your gut. So there's this very real connection and pathway of information that goes one way to the other. And they're really determining that the impact that bacteria in your gut really has a strong impact on what that message is. So just trying to like put some relevancy on this, because I think it's pretty important in overall health.
I appreciate that. There are a lot of studies out there that should make us wake up and take it a little more seriously. There's another one that I'll just mention really quickly. It's pretty crazy. They found that basically there is a microbiome inside mice that rewires their brain. So basically, instead of being afraid of cat pee, they're attracted to it. So basically, that microbiome over, I don't know, however many years, has developed to the point of rewiring a mouse's brain to get inside of a cat's gut, is what it looks like. I mean, there's some pretty crazy things as far as the microbiome goes that are happening. Have you heard about that one?
I haven't heard about
It's a pretty wild one. Anyways, there's a book, if you're interested in looking further into it, the gut-brain axis.
Gut-brain connection.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. It's full of those studies, and that's where I pulled that one from. Okay. Phosphatidylserine. This is a neurotropic that actually has got some on that FDA's website, so I thought it was worth putting in here. So their claim is may reduce the risk of cognitive dysfunction in the elderly, and some other things they've seen with it is that it reduces cortisol. High glycemic carbs should be reserved for pre, mid, and post moderate to high intensity exercise. So if somebody's hitting some cardio, probably shouldn't encourage hitting those high glycemic carbs after that, unless it's the intensity is really the variable there, right? So unless it's high intensity cardio. So first day on, moderate to low intensity, normal carbohydrate intake. Second day, low intensity, keep the carbs normal. And then the first day off, we can start reducing. But I was wondering, when we're trying to recover on the second day off, say we didn't sleep very well, and we got that leptin-ghrelin mismatch and the insulin resistance. Is that the best strategy? Would it be?
I mean, you can reduce carbohydrates still in a level that's, maintainable. So depending on where you are, you don't have to be so low carb, but just bring it down a little bit and be aware of the quality of the carbohydrates that you're consuming.
Yeah, so maybe the recommendation, if we have a 4 nights of rest, should be probably no high glycemic carbs that day. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's reasonable, as long as that's reasonable for the person doing it. So.
Yeah, it definitely has to be personalized. So the high intensity work probably should be reserved for days off, so that you're not glycogen depleted. And then day 6 should be focused on getting ready and hydrated and making sure you're all squared away for the next 2 days. Because if you plan ahead and if you prepare adequately, then when you have a rough shift, it's not going to have as big of an impact.